Now that Dr. Njoroge has been formally reappointed for second term in office, what should we expect over the next 4 years? Reginald Kadzutu is the Chief Investment Officer at Amana Capital, is live with me in studio tonight. So then, when we were last year talking about Dr. Njoroge,
Yes.
you said if you'd reappoint him for second and final term, you would put him back in office. But now that he's back, what should he be focusing on?
I think 2 or 3 areas. Main one is the basics of any monetary policy, the appropriate level of supply or demand of money. Most of the times we normally run around many things that the central bank is supposed to do, but their chief responsibility is actually the supply of money. And in his last term, I think money supply growth outstripped growth in real income, which is very dangerous. Because you find money supply in a period of 5 years, 6 years grew by more than 200%. Well, when real income grew by less than 50, 40%. And when you have such a situation, then you end up having surplus money in the economy.
You're basically priming the pump for inflation.
Exactly. So if you have too much money, more than what industry and trade require, you find people end up using money for speculative purposes, and then it becomes inflationary. And when inflationary pressures start coming in, and that's something that has been there. If you look at the CPI 6, 7 years ago and the CPI now, the currency itself has lost close to 100% of its purchasing power. So you find speculative and unproductive investments of or allocation of resources in things like jewelry, gold, real estate, and even just basic hoarding. And now he's trying to get rid of the 1,000 shilling because of a problem that they created themselves. So I think he needs to focus on that to control the level of M3 growth, to make sure that it's roughly equal to also the growth of real income.
But beyond the basics, that's the bread and butter foundational stuff. But beyond that, if you look at all the other things he's supposed to actually have in his retinue, control of rates, that's essentially been crippled because of the rate caps being in place. He's not licensing any new banks. There's been a moratorium on that for the last 4 years. And even on the bank regulation side, the bulk of assets are basically concentrated just in, I believe, the top 10 banks in the country. So really, what else is there for him to do?
If he actually sits back and realizes that he's in a developing country, put it in other ways, an underdeveloped country in terms of financial markets and systems.
Yeah.
2 things that I will do as Njoroge in my last 4 terms. Number 1 is credit control. Credit control in the element of, if you look at the tenure of the loans that the banks give, the commercial loans, they're all short term. And you're not going to grow an economy or grow a business by getting 5 years, 6 years, or even 10 years loan. You need a longer duration of loans. And for banks to be able to do that, central bank needs to come in and start discounting and guaranteeing. Just like what they've started doing with the Kenya mortgage finance, whatever. Yeah. That's a brilliant idea. They just need to make sure that they put the framework and the structure around such type of discounting and assisting the market. So credit growth, credit control is one thing that he needs to do. The second thing he needs to do, we need more institutions like the Kenya Mortgage Refinancing Institution, so that we can direct resources to the direct areas in the economy that actually need the funds, the productive side of the economy. So that's a role that he needs to start playing as a central bank governor.
But, and I'm going to play the devil's advocate here,
Yeah.
but in a country where fiscal policy has its foot flat on the gas, and I'm actually paraphrasing something he said back in 2015 when he came in, fiscal policy has got its foot flat on the gas. We're running enormous deficits year after year after year. We're raising taxes year after year after year. And monetary policy has been, well, for what we can call monetary policy, because it's been a bit constrained, that's been relatively tame. Who's going to lend us long-term patient capital in that sort of environment?
Pretty much no one, because you have a fiscal policy which is expansionary and at the same time contrarily, because they are spending and they are raising taxes. So it's a confused fiscal policy. It's a fiscal policy with no head, no neither or tail, or even a belly for that sake. Then you have a monetary policy that is trying to create cheap money. And the purpose of doing cheap money is to allow the government to borrow cheaply. So manage the debt burden by making sure that debt is cheaper for the government. But as long as there's no congruence between the two, when will these guys stop borrowing? When will the fiscal policy get to a place where it is balanced. Because as long as they're running a deficit, the monetary policy said there's no option man just to keep rates low, because one of his responsibilities is actually to manage the debt burden of the government. So he becomes a lame duck governor. As long as fiscal policy is going to remain expansionary in projects which don't make economic sense, that means they're going to continue running budget deficit. We have a very low saving rate in the country. So we have to borrow to cover our deficit, so deficit financing through borrowing. So one thing that he has to do as a governor is trying to find out a way, how do you encourage individual or micro saving or even corporate saving in the country, so that you create a pool of resources which the government can now tap into, or even private sector can tap into to grow without having to resort to deficit financing and borrowing. So if he decides to be apolitical, and becomes a governor and an academic and uses his doctorate degree to the fullest extent, then he has actually quite a bit he can actually do for the good of the country. But if he decides to play the political appointee role, then he's a lame duck. We will not see interest rates going up. He will continue trying to do cheap money monetary policy to manage the debt burden of the fiscus.
Right, we'll leave it there for the time being. Reginald, always good to have you on the set.